I used to believe silence was peace, that the still water of my lake, the whisper of the wind through the reeds, and the distant calls of loons were nature's way of saying, "You've earned this, Ethan." I built my cabin here 20 years ago, at the edge of a shimmering valley lake surrounded by old oaks and soft clay hills. It wasn't much, a single-story structure with a tin roof and a porch that creaked every time you sat in the old rocking chair. But to me, it was everything. I had bought this land after my father's death. It was his dream to live away from the noise, the politics, and the pretense of people who thought they owned the world because they could sign a check. He taught me to value patience and water, how both could carve their mark if left long enough. "The river always wins, Ethan," he used to say, his finger tracing lines in the mud by the stream, not by force, but by persistence. For 20 years, I lived quietly. I fished, fixed fences, maintained the dam my father built, and watched seasons change like chapters in a patient book. But peace, I learned, only lasts until someone decides your calm is their opportunity. It started one spring morning when I saw strangers walking the perimeter of my property. 3 men in reflective vests and a woman holding a clipboard. I walked down to them, boots squelching through damp soil. "Can I help you folks?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. The woman looked up, all polite smiles and glossy confidence. "Oh, you must be the caretaker." "Owner," I corrected, tightening my jaw. "Name's Ethan Hale. What's going on here?" She introduced herself as Samantha Brooks, representative of the Lakeview Homeowners Association Development Committee. Her words sounded rehearsed, too polished. She explained that the city had approved new zoning for a residential expansion, 35 luxury homes along the East Ridge, right on the waterline. My waterline. I frowned. That ridge is my property. I own every acre down to the third bend of the creek. She smiled, like someone humoring a confused customer. "Actually, that's what we wanted to discuss. There seems to be a discrepancy in the old survey documents. The land may technically fall under the new parcel acquisition. May doesn't mean it does." I said flatly, "You're standing on private property." The men in vests shifted uncomfortably, waiting for her lead. Samantha kept her smile, but her tone sharpened. "We'll have our legal team reach out. You might find it's best to cooperate, Mr. Hale. Progress tends to move forward, with or without permission." That line, "with or without permission," stuck in my mind like a splinter. Over the next few months, I got letters, then meetings, then court notices. Their lawyers twisted words like barbed wire. They claimed the county's new zoning maps merged my land with the HOA's development district. Some old clerical error from decades ago. I fought back, of course. Hired a lawyer I couldn't afford. But the system was a slow, grinding machine, and I was just one man standing in its gears. By the time the first bulldozer arrived, I'd already lost half the battle. They came roaring down the old dirt road that once led to my father's fishing dock. The land shook beneath me as machines tore through the trees we'd planted together, roots ripped from the earth like veins being pulled from flesh. I remember standing there, watching clouds of dust rise above my lake, thinking how strange it was that destruction had a rhythm. Crunch, grind, smash, repeat, like a war drum beating for the gods agreed. The HOA called it the Lakeview expansion. They built their homes fast, cookie-cutter mansions with manicured lawns and driveways wide enough for 3 SUVs. They replaced the song of crickets with the constant buzz of lawnmowers and leaf blowers. They built fences that sliced the landscape into tiny boxes of pride. They didn't even ask about the dam. The dam had been there longer than any of them, an old stone structure my father engineered by hand. It wasn't just a water barrier. It was a careful balance. It kept the lake from flooding the lowlands during spring rains, channeling excess water through controlled gates. But when the HOA filled the drainage ditches with concrete driveways and sewer lines, the balance shifted. I warned them. I went to their meetings, stood in rooms full of suits and designer handbags, and tried to explain. "You're building on floodplain soil," I said. "That dam keeps your homes dry. You start altering the runoff, and one bad storm could send half your neighborhood underwater." They laughed, literally laughed. A man in a navy blazer, probably the HOA president, leaned forward with a smirk. "Sir, we appreciate your rustic concern, but our engineers are professionals. We reviewed all the data. If you're uncomfortable living near a modern community, there are relocation programs available." Relocation. They wanted to buy me out for a fraction of what my land was worth. I refused. That was when things got personal. They blocked my road with construction trucks. They tore down the private property signs. One morning, I found the gate to my boathouse padlocked by them. They even reported me to the county for environmental obstruction because my dam restricted natural water flow. The audacity made my blood boil. Every night, I'd sit on my porch watching the reflection of their streetlights dance across the water. My lake, my peace, had become a mirror to their arrogance. Then came the storm. It was mid-September, the air thick with the smell of rain and tension. Weather reports warned of a once-in-a-decade deluge. 6 inches in a single night. I walked the dam before dusk, inspecting every crack, every bolt. The lake was already swollen, dark waves licking at the stone edges like an animal pacing in its cage. And then I saw them, 2 HOA workers dumping gravel near the drainage culvert. They said they were reinforcing runoff lines. What they were really doing was blocking the emergency overflow channel I'd warned about, the one that kept water from backing up into their shiny new development. I shouted, but they ignored me. They had orders. I went back home, soaked to the bone, fury burning hotter than the storm. That night, thunder rolled across the valley like cannon fire. Rain hammered the roof until it felt like the world was trying to drown itself. I could hear the dam groaning beneath the pressure. Water rushed louder than I'd ever heard before, a roar rising from the dark like something ancient and unstoppable. I grabbed my flashlight and boots, running through sheets of rain toward the dam. The earth trembled. The lake had swollen nearly 2 feet above the warning line. I knew the overflow gate couldn't handle it, not with the HOA's gravel barricade blocking the release. When I reached the control panel, lightning split the sky, revealing what lay ahead, rows of pristine houses built where floodwater used to breathe. And for a moment, I hesitated, because I knew what would happen if I pulled that lever. The dam would open. The lake would pour down the valley. Those 35 homes, the ones built on stolen land, would feel what it meant to steal from nature's balance. But then I remembered Samantha Brooks' voice. Progress tends to move forward, with or without permission. I stared into the dark surge beneath me, and something inside broke. Maybe it was patience. Maybe it was mercy. Maybe both. I pulled the lever. The metal screeched, and the old gates groaned open. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then the world erupted. Water exploded through the channels, tearing through the valley like a beast unchained. Lightning illuminated the torrent as it crashed through fences, tore up lawns, and swept across asphalt driveways. Streetlights blinked out one by one as the flood surged onward. From the ridge, I could see rooftops vanishing under brown waves. The HOA's perfect neighborhood, their symbol of triumph, drowned beneath the same water they tried to control. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just stood there, rain running down my face, watching years of arrogance get washed away. By dawn, the storm had passed. The sun rose pale and cold, reflecting off a vast, muddy lake that stretched where houses once stood. And in that silence, broken only by the distant cries of sirens, I realized something my father never told me. The river doesn't always win because it's patient. Sometimes it wins because someone finally stops holding it back. The morning after the flood was too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses on your ears, making you aware of every breath you take. Mist rolled off the muddy expanse where my lake used to end. Now it stretched far beyond its old boundaries, swallowing roads, mailboxes, fences, and the neat symmetry of the HOA's proudest development. The world looked colorless, just grays and browns, the colors of ruin. I stood by the dam, boots sinking into wet soil. The stone walls glistened in the pale morning light, slick with rain and silt. My hands still trembled. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night watching the surge rage down the valley, watching lights flicker and die, listening to the distant chorus of alarms and chaos. And now, Standing in the aftermath, I couldn't tell if I'd done something righteous or monstrous. From the ridge, I could see roofs barely breaking the surface, cars half buried, a child's bicycle caught in a tree. It was one thing to dream of justice. It was another to see what justice cost when it came in waves. I turned toward the sound of an engine. A rescue boat was cutting across the new lake, carrying people wrapped in blankets. Behind them, more boats, police, firefighters, and reporters. I wasn't surprised when they came for me. 2 officers approached, mud up to their knees, their expressions unreadable. "Mr. Ethan Hale?" one asked. I nodded. "We need you to come with us." I didn't resist. There was no point pretending. They didn't even have to ask what happened. I was the man who owned the dam, the man who'd been shouting warning for months, the man who had, in their eyes, finally snapped. As they led me toward their truck, I caught sight of Samantha Brooks. She was wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. Her hair plastered to her face, eyes red from either crying or fury. When she saw me, she pointed and screamed something I couldn't hear over the wind, but I didn't need to. I could read the shape of the word on her lips. "You?" They took me to the sheriff's office in town. Reporters swarmed the parking lot like vultures sensing fresh carrion. Microphones, flashes, the endless repetition of the same question. "Did you do it on purpose?" Inside, they sat me in a cold room with gray walls and one flickering light. The sheriff, a man named Doyle who'd known me since I was a kid, sat across the table with a look caught between pity and disbelief. "Ethan," he said quietly, "tell me it was an accident." I leaned back, wet clothes clinging to my skin, and stared at the water dripping from my sleeves. "The gates were jammed," I said after a long pause. "Too much pressure. I had to open them." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You understand how this looks, right? 35 homes underwater, property damage in the millions, and half the HOA board claiming you threatened them. We got witnesses, Ethan." "I warned them," I said softly. "I told them that gravel they dumped would block the overflow. They ignored it." Doyle met my eyes. "Even if that's true, pulling that lever, save the dam," I interrupted. "If I hadn't, the whole structure could have collapsed. That would have been worse." He looked down at his notes, then back at me. "The district attorney will decide if this was negligence or intent. For now, you're free to go, but don't leave town." I nodded. I wasn't planning to. Where would I even go? Outside, the town buzzed with panic. Trucks filled with volunteers headed toward the flooded zone. The local diner was overflowing with displaced families. People whispered my name like it was a curse. By sunset, the floodwater began to recede slightly, revealing the bones of destruction. Collapsed garages, shattered windows, and yards turned into mud pits. I walked home through it all, each step heavy with the realization that what was gone wasn't just property. It was pride, status, image. The next day, a news van parked near my driveway. A reporter approached me, microphone in hand, her tone carefully balanced between sympathy and accusation. "Mr. Hale, people are calling this an act of revenge. Some are even saying you intended to flood the development because of your ongoing dispute with the HOA. What do you have to say about that?" I looked straight into the camera. "I didn't flood the homes," I said calmly. "They flooded themselves the day they built on someone else's land and ignored the land's warning." That clip went viral. By evening, social media had turned the story into a storm of its own. Half the world painted me as a folk hero, the man who fought the HOA and won. The other half called me a criminal, a bitter recluse who destroyed lives over a grudge. Hashtag spun like whirlpools. Hashtag damn justice. Hashtag HO havoc. Hashtag flood revenge. The town couldn't decide whether to thank me or hang me. A week later, the county sent investigators to assess the damage. I met them at the dam, where the water had finally settled. They studied the stonework, the control mechanisms, and the gravel blockage that still clogged the drainage channel. One of them, an older engineer with a calm demeanor, squatted beside the jam gate. "This wasn't built for that kind of obstruction," he said. "If it hadn't been opened, pressure would have ruptured the main barrier." "Meaning?" I asked quietly. He looked up. "Meaning you might have saved more than you destroyed." It should have felt like relief. But it didn't, because saving something doesn't erase what's already been lost. That night, I stood on the same ridge where I'd pulled the lever. The valley below looked different now, raw and humbled. Streetlights flickered like fireflies over the muddy expanse. The homes were empty shells, their perfect facades smeared with silt. And for the first time since it happened, I allowed myself to think about the people inside those homes. The ones who'd laughed at me, the ones who'd ignored every warning, and the ones who hadn't done anything at all. Families who just wanted a place to live, not realizing they'd built it on stolen ground. Guilt is a slow poison. It doesn't hit like rage or panic. It seeps into the cracks of your thoughts, turning every breath into a question. The next morning, I drove down into what was once the Lakeview neighborhood. Mud squelched under my tires, and the air smelled of damp wood and diesel fuel. FEMA workers were already there, hauling debris and marking unsafe structures. Samantha Brooks stood in the middle of it all, clipboard in hand, barking orders. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. She looked like someone who'd lost everything but refused to admit it. "You've got nerve showing your face here," she said, voice trembling. "I came to help," I said simply. "Help." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You call this helping? You ruin lives, Hale. People's homes, memories. They ruined this land first." I said, "All I did was stop holding back what was already coming." She stepped closer, anger radiating off her. "You think nature is your weapon? You think you're some kind of god because you control a gate? You're not righteous. You're just bitter that progress left you behind." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Maybe she was right. Maybe part of me was bitter. But bitterness didn't move that water. Nature did. Greed did. I didn't answer her. I just turned away, watching volunteers load sandbags into trucks, their boots sloshing through the wreckage. For the next few days, I helped where I could, hauling debris, clearing ditches, even rebuilding part of the road. People avoided me at first, whispering behind my back. But slowly, a few began to talk. An older man whose garage had been flooded came up to me and said, "You warned them, didn't you?" "I did," I said. He nodded, looking out over the wreckage. "Then this wasn't on you." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close. A month passed. Investigators confirmed that the HOA's unauthorized modifications had blocked the dam's emergency channel. The county fined them heavily for illegal construction. Their insurance refused to cover most of the losses. Samantha resigned. And me? The charges were dropped. The sheriff himself called to tell me. "Guess the river really does win," Doyle said with a tired smile. I hung up and walked outside. The air smelled clean, sharp with the scent of autumn. The water line had retreated back to its rightful place, calm and still. For the first time in months, the lake looked like home again. Yet something inside me felt different. Not victory, not peace, just a quiet understanding that justice doesn't come without scars, on land or in hearts. As the sun set, I sat by the water's edge, the reflection of orange light dancing across the ripples. I thought of my father, of the lessons he left behind, and how the world had changed. Progress had tried to build walls where water once flowed freely. But walls crumble. Water endures. And deep down, I knew this story wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, about the land remembering what humans forget. You can't own nature. You can only respect it. The first frost came early that year. It crept over the valley like a soft shroud, covering what was left of the Lakeview development in a thin white layer that almost made the destruction look peaceful. From a ridge above the dam, I could still trace the outlines of where streets once wound between perfect suburban homes. Now they were just faint scars beneath the frozen mud, lines of concrete, twisted rebar, and shattered fences. Winter's silence replaced the chaos of the flood. No engines, no laughter, no barking dogs or sprinklers hissing in the morning sun. Just a whisper of wind over the water, and the faint groan of the old dam settling under the cold. I spent my mornings walking the shoreline, repairing what I could. The flood had changed the land's shape. New channels formed, carving to the soil like veins in an open hand. I planted saplings along the ridge where the trees had been torn down, hoping that someday the roots would hold stronger than the arrogance that once stood there. Some evenings, I'd find old fragments washing up, pieces of someone else's life. A half-broken picture frame, a porch light, a child's toy. Each one was a reminder that even when water takes, it never forgets what it's taken. Word spread that most of the displaced families had moved away. A few stayed in town, living in rentals while lawsuits tangled to the courts like vines choking a tree. Samantha Brooks, from what I heard, had left the state entirely. Some said she was starting over. Others said she couldn't bear the shame. I didn't wish her harm, only understanding. A month before Christmas, the sheriff stopped by. Doyle stood at the edge of my porch, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, his breath clouding in the cold. "Place looks different," he said, glancing at the repaired dam and the still water. "Land needed to breathe," I said quietly. He nodded. "You know, the county's thinking of turning the floodplain into a protected reserve. They say the soil's too unstable for rebuilding. Maybe that's for the best." "Maybe," I replied. "Sometimes things aren't meant to be rebuilt." He studied me for a moment. "You planning on staying out here alone?" I smiled faintly. Wasn't that what I was doing before all this started? "Yeah," he said, "but it's different now. You're part of something bigger than just solitude, Ethan. People talk about what happened. Some call you crazy. Others, they think you reminded this town what real stewardship means." I didn't answer right away. The word stewardship lingered like a reflection on calm water. My father had once said the same thing. A man doesn't own land. He takes care of it for the next soul who will walk it. Before Doyle left, he reached into his coat and handed me a folded newspaper. "You might want to see this." On the front page was a headline: "County declares flooded development, natural wetland zone." Beneath it was a photo of the valley, shimmering under winter sunlight, alive again with migrating birds. For a moment, I didn't see destruction. I saw restoration. The flood hadn't erased life. It had given it back. When Doyle drove off, I sat on the porch steps and stared out over the lake. The surface was glass smooth, broken only by the occasional ripple of a duck landing. The air smelled of pine and frost. Peace, real peace, had returned, but not the kind I used to know. This peace carried memory, weight, consequence. Tea, hat night. I lit a fire and opened my father's old journal. The pages were yellowed, edges curling, the ink faint but still legible. Near the back was an entry I'd never noticed before. "Water doesn't seek revenge. It seeks balance. When men forget that, the earth remembers for them." I closed the book and stared into the flames, feeling both humbled and forgiven. Weeks turned into months. The reserve designation brought scientists and environmentalists to study the new wetland. They called it Lake Hale, a name I never asked for but couldn't help feeling strange pride in. They said the flood had revived dormant ecosystems, restored bird populations, and balanced the groundwater table better than any engineered system ever could. Nature had reclaimed what greed had stolen, and all I had done, perhaps all I'd ever been meant to do, was stop trying to control it. One day, while walking the Southern Trail, I came across a small group of volunteers planting trees. Among them was a boy, maybe 12, digging with a small spade. He looked up and said, "Are you the man who lives by the dam?" I nodded. "Guess I am." "My dad says you saved the valley," he said. "He said if you hadn't opened the gates, the dam might have exploded and the whole town would have flooded." I smiled softly. "I didn't save it, kid. The land did what it had to do. I just stopped getting in its way." He frowned thoughtfully, then went back to planting. Kids understand truth in ways adults forget. That evening, a letter arrived in the mail, handwritten, no return address. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. "Ethan, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not sure I deserve it. You were right. We didn't listen. I thought I could control the land, that paperwork and concrete meant ownership. But I see now that it never belonged to us. It belonged to itself. I lost everything that night, my house, my job, my reputation. But what I gained was something I didn't know I needed, perspective. I'm working in Oregon now, helping with a coastal restoration project. Maybe that's how I started to make peace." "Samantha," I folded the letter slowly. then slipped it into my father's old journal, between the pages about river flow and stewardship. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about recognizing that even destruction can be a teacher. Spring returned with an almost divine gentleness. The trees I planted began to take root. Green blades pushed through the silt. The water found its rhythm again, calm and clear, reflecting the sky like it never held a grudge. Visitors came now. Families walking the new trails. Artists painting the horizon. Children skipping stones where mansions once stood. They didn't know the full story, and maybe that was fine. All they saw was beauty restored. One afternoon, a young journalist came to interview me for a documentary on environmental resilience. She asked, "If you could go back to that night, would you still pull the lever?" I stared out at the water, the sun setting low and red behind the ridge. "I'd pull it," I said quietly, but not out of anger this time. I'd do it because balance is mercy in its purest form. Sometimes the hardest thing a man can do is let the world correct itself. She nodded, writing something in her notebook, but I could tell she didn't fully grasp it. And maybe she wasn't supposed to. Understanding comes from experience, not from stories told secondhand. After she left, I walked the dam one last time before dusk. The stone was cool beneath my fingers, worn smooth by decades of water and weather. The gates hummed softly, steady and alive. This time, I didn't see a weapon or a wall. I saw a lesson. My father's voice echoed in memory. The river always wins, Ethan. Not because it fights harder, but because it never stops flowing. And for the first time, I truly understood him. Now, when people ask what happened here, I tell them the truth, but not the one written in court records or news reports. I tell them about a man who thought peace came from silence, until he learned that peace sometimes demands a storm first. I tell them about arrogance disguised as progress, and about a valley that refused to be tamed. Most of all, I tell them about the night the water remembered its path, and how one man stood between vengeance and balance, and finally chose to let nature speak. As twilight deepens over Lake Hale, the surface glows with soft gold. The reeds sway gently, the same ones my father once planted by hand. And if you listen closely, you can hear the faint murmur of the dam, not angry, not vengeful, just patient. The kind of patience that outlasts greed, outlasts concrete, outlasts men. Because peace isn't silence. Peace is balance. And balance always finds its way home.